Hey guys, tonight we stand on a muddy, windswept bank of a tidal river that doesn't yet know it's about to become famous. You're ankle deep in marshland, the air sharp with salt and silt, and somewhere in the distance a heron lifts lazily into the gray sky. There are no glass towers, no underground rumbling beneath your feet, just reeds, drifting mist, and the slow breathing of the River Thames as it widens toward the sea. It's hard to believe this soggy stretch of Britannia will one day be home to more than 9 million people. You probably won't survive this version of London by the way malaria from the marshes, questionable drinking water, and the distinct lack of coffee shops make it a tough sell. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from and what your local time is. I love imagining this little global night watch we've built together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 43 AD. You hear it before you see it, the rhythmic thud of boots and the creak of leather. 4 Roman legions have landed on the Kent coast under Emperor Claudius. Around 40,000 soldiers, engineers, and support staff are pushing inland. This is not a sightseeing trip. They need a crossing point over the Thames, somewhere narrow enough for a bridge, but deep enough for ships to dock. Strategically, it's perfect. The lowest point before the river widens into a broad estuary, so you watch them measure, argue, and gesture with wax tablets. Within a few years, timber piles are hammered into the riverbed. The first London Bridge rises roughly where the modern one stands today, a mainstream historical fact that quietly anchors to millennia of continuity. Around it, a settlement springs up almost overnight. They call it Londinium. You wander through early Roman streets that are more mud than pavement. Traders from Gaul shout in Latin with thick accents. Soldiers from Syria haggle for bread. North African merchants unload amphorae filled with olive oil and wine. It smells like fish sauce garum, the Roman condiment that makes everything taste faintly of fermented mystery. You try not to think about it. Within a decade, Londinium is thriving. Wooden building, clustered tightly. A small forum forms. Warehouses line the waterfront. You can hear hammers striking iron, dogs barking, carts rattling over planks. It's messy, loud, and alive. And already, it's diverse. London's multicultural habit didn't begin in the 20th century, was baked in from the start. Then, just 17 years after its founding, disaster arrives on horseback. Her name is Boudica, queen of the Iceni tribe. Historians still argue whether her rebellion was purely a reaction to Roman cruelty or also a calculated power move in a shifting tribal landscape. Either way, you see the smoke first. Her forces sweep down on Londinium in 60 or 61 AD. The Roman governor, Suetonius Paulinus, decides the town cannot be defended. He withdraws his troops, leaving the settlement exposed. You stand frozen as flames leap from rooftop to rooftop. The timber buildings burn fast, hungry, and bright. Archaeologists in the modern city have found a distinct layer of red ash beneath London's streets, physical proof of this destruction. That layer is under your feet right now, though you don't know it yet. The crackle of fire is relentless. Roofs collapse. Storehouses explode in showers of sparks. It's over quickly and brutally. And yet, this is London's first lesson in resilience. The Romans return. They don't sulk. They rebuild. This time, bigger, stronger, more Roman. You watch as stone replaces timber. A massive defensive wall begins to encircle the city in the late 2nd century. Portions of that Roman wall will still stand nearly 2,000 years later, tucked behind modern office blocks like stubborn old bones. The wall stretches roughly 2 miles, with gates controlling entry. Londinium becomes not just a trading post, but the administrative capital of Roman Britain. By the early 2nd century, perhaps 45,000 to 60,000 people live here, making it the largest city in Britannia. You stroll through a proper forum and basilica, administrative heart of the province. There's an amphitheater where crowds gather to watch gladiatorial contests. Yes, in London, somewhere near today's Guildhall. Men once fought for spectacle and survival. It's a strange mental image. Gladiators where office workers now check emails. There are bathhouses, too social, surprisingly sophisticated. Underfloor heating warms the room. You sit on a stone bench and realize Roman Britain might not be quite as primitive as you imagined. They even have a rudimentary sewer system. London will, in fairness, forget how to manage sewage several times over the next 2 millennia. But for now, it's impressively organized. A quirky tidbit floats your way. Archaeologists once discovered writing tablets in the mud along the Thamesden wooden sheets with ink inscriptions. One of them contains what might be the earliest written reference to London, dated around 65 AD. It's basically a Roman receipt. London's first surviving written mention is paperwork. Some things never change, but prosperity depends on stability, and stability depends on Rome. By the late 3rd century, the Roman Empire is under pressure. Political chaos, economic strain, invasions along distant frontiers. Londinium remains important, even briefly serving as the capital of the breakaway Gallic Empire in the 260s. You feel the tension in the air. Soldiers patrol more frequently. Repairs to the walls become urgent. In 410 AD, Emperor Honorius sends a blunt message to the cities of Britain. Defend yourself. Rome can no longer spare troops. The legions withdraw. At first, the departure feels temporary. Surely they'll come back. Surely this is just a strategic redeployment. But the ships don't return. Trade networks collapse. No more regular shipments of wine from Gaul or oil from Hispania. Roman coinage loses meaning. Skilled administrators and merchants drift away. You wander through streets that feel quieter each season. Roof tiles go unrepaired. Public buildings crumble slowly. Then suddenly, within a generation, the population plummets from tens of thousands to perhaps only a few hundred people squatting among the ruins. Historians still argue whether this collapse was rapid and catastrophic or more gradual and uneven. But standing here, it feels like a long exhale that never quite ends. Grass pushes through mosaic floors. The amphitheater fills with debris. The forum becomes a shelter for livestock. A fox darts through what used to be a bathhouse corridor. Londinium, once polished and bustling, now echoes. And yet the river keeps flowing. The Thames doesn't care about empires. It moves with the tide, patient and indifferent. Rivers have a way of attracting new beginnings. You sense it already, that this isn't an ending. It's a pause. A city reduced to memory, waiting for new voices, new builders, new ambitions. For now, though, you stand in the fading light of Roman Britain. The marshland you first stepped into has become a walled stone city, and then a hollowed shell in less than 4 centuries. In London time, that's barely a warm-up act. You turn toward the quiet riverbank, again, listening to reeds whisper in the dusk, unaware that Saxon settlers are already drifting across the horizon, bringing with them a completely different idea of what a city should be. And London, though no one quite calls it that, yet is about to change its shape once more. You remain inside the old Roman walls, though inside now feels generous. The gates still stand, heavy and squared, but ivy creeps along the stonework like nature filing a quiet complaint. The great city of Londinium has not vanished overnight. It has thinned, softened, faded at the edges. Roof tiles slip, timber beams rot, rain pools where senators once walked in polished sandals. You step through what used to be the forum. The basilica's columns are cracked, but they're still impressive. If you squint, you can almost hear Latin echoing off the stone clerks arguing over taxes. Magistrates pretending to look decisive. A mainstream historical fact settles over you. By the late 4th century, Londinium was still the administrative capital of Roman Britain, complete with official buildings and a governor's residence. This was no backwater. It mattered. But Rome is unraveling. Barbarian federations press at its border. Civil wars flicker like distant lightning. Britain is expensive to defend and awkwardly far away. So when the legions withdraw around 410 AD, it's less dramatic trumpet blast and more exhausted, shrugged. At first, daily life limps on. Local Romano-British elites try to maintain order. The walls still stand. The river still offers trade routes. But you notice the subtle signs of decay. Imported goods become rare. The fine red Samian, where pottery from Gaul disappears from market stalls. Instead, you see coarse, locally made ceramics, functional, unglamorous. We're doing our best. Coins stop circulating in meaningful quantities. Roman currency becomes essentially decorative metal. Historians still argue whether Britain experienced a sudden economic collapse or a drawn-out transition into localized barter systems. As you watch a former merchant trade grain for a wool cloak, you suspect the answer is both, depending on who you were. The population dwindles, not in one dramatic exodus, but in waves. Skilled craftsmen leave for safer provinces. Administrators return to the continent. Soldiers, no longer paid reliably, drift off. Within decades, the grand Roman infrastructure feels oversized for the people left behind. You wander toward the amphitheater, near what will one day be full. It's partially filled with debris. Someone has built a crude hut in one corner, using scavenged stone and timber. The arena floor, once stained with spectacle and sand, now hosts chickens. It's oddly peaceful, also mildly humiliating for the Romans. There's a quirky, slightly eerie tidbit that clings to this period. Later, Saxon writers would describe the ruins of Roman cities as the work of giants. They genuinely could not fathom how ordinary humans built such massive stone structures. Standing here, you understand why, without cranes, without visible engineering manuals, the walls seem mythic. And yet, life persists. Small communities occupy parts of the walled city. Archaeological evidence suggests there was still activity in the 5th century burial. Bits of imported pottery, occasional repairs. This isn't a completely abandoned ghost town. It's more like a once grand theater after the audience has gone home, with a few stubborn stagehands refusing to leave. Outside the walls, fields expand. Nature reclaims suburban villas. You trudge along what used to be a paved road. Grass grows through its cracks. Sheep graze where carts once rattled. The Thames, however, remains busy in its own way. Boats still move along it, though fewer and humbler. Historians still argue whether London was largely deserted for a time or continuously inhabited at a low level. The archaeological layers are frustratingly patchy-like, a historical book with missing chapters. But from where you stand, it feels thin, quiet, a city holding its breath. And then, slowly, new accents arrive. Germanic-speaking groups Angles, Saxons, Jutes begin settling in parts of Britain during the 5th and 6th centuries. You don't see a single dramatic invasion wave. It's more a series of migrations, alliances, skirmishes, and settlements. Some come as mercenaries, some come as farmers, some come because opportunity smells stronger than danger. They don't immediately flock to the Roman walled city. In fact, they seem wary of it. The massive stone structures feel alien, perhaps even cursed. Why live in a crumbling Roman shell when you can build fresh wooden halls in open fields? So you watch as activity shifts slightly westward, away from the old core. The Roman city becomes a kind of monumental ruiner reminder of a vanished order. Inside the wall, a few families persist. Outside, new villages take shape. You step through the eastern gate at dusk. The wall looms behind you, stubborn and silent. It will stand for centuries, long after the empire that built it is a footnote. That's the thing about infrastructure. Build it well, and it outlives you. Back inside, someone has repurposed a Roman bathhouse. The hypocaust underfloor heating system no longer functions, but the sturdy stone walls provide shelter. It's like camping in an abandoned spa. 5 stars, if you ignore the missing roof. A mainstream historical anchor steadies you again. By the 7th century, documentary sources begin mentioning London in Anglo-Saxon contexts, indicating that while its importance fluctuated, it never completely disappeared from the map. The name evolves London, Lundenburg shifting with tongues and time. You crouch near the riverbank and notice remnants of old Roman quays timber piles still embedded in the mud. Trade never fully vanishes. The Thames remains a highway, and highways attract ambition. Even in reduced circumstances, this location makes sense. It always will. There's a lingering debate among scholars about whether the early Anglo-Saxon presence in London was primarily peaceful settlement or the result of conquest over Romano-British populations. The evidence is frustratingly ambiguous. You imagine quiet coexistence in some places, tension in others. History rarely offers clean transition. By now, the once grand streets of Londinium are a patchwork of memories. Roman inscriptions lie half buried. Mosaic fragments glint underfoot. A child uses a piece of carved marble as a makeshift seat, unaware that senators once brushed past it in flowing togas. You walk along the wall at sunset. From here, you see the river curve eastward toward the sea. The city inside feels small, almost intimate, compared to its former scale. Maybe a few hundred, perhaps 1,000 souls at most. It's impossible to know precisely. The census takers are long gone. And yet, there's something stubborn here. Cities are not just buildings, they're habits. And the habit of gathering at this bend in the Thames proves hard to break. Even when empires withdraw and trade falters, people linger. They farm nearby, they fish, they repair old walls with new mortar. They reuse Roman bricks in Saxon halls, recycling 5th century edition. As night settles, you sense that this is a hinge moment. Londinium, the Roman city, has faded. But London, the idea of London, has not died. It's thinner, quieter, humbler, but it's still here, clinging to stone and riverbank. The ruins may look haunted to newcomers, like the work of giants, but they are also foundations. Foundations waiting for new markets, new rulers, new languages. Soon, a trading settlement will rise just west of these silent walls. Not because anyone planned a grand revival, but because rivers invite exchange, and exchange invites community. For now, you stand between eras, Rome behind you in crumbling stone, something Saxon and unfamiliar stirring beyond the fields. The marshland is no longer empty, the empire is gone, but the river keeps flowing, patient as ever, carrying the promise that London, whatever shape it takes, next is not finished. Not even close. You drift west from the crumbling Roman walls, leaving behind the hollow basilicas and ivy-choked amphitheater. The old city still stands, stubborn and skeletal, but it no longer feels like the center of gravity. Instead, you follow the curve of the Thames to a stretch of slightly higher, drier ground. It's the late 7th century, now around the 670s. Something new is stirring. The Saxons, who once eyed the Roman ruins as if they were the haunted work of giants, have changed their minds about this riverbend. Not about the old walled city that still feels too heavy with ghosts, but about the land just to the west. Here, they build a new settlement, Lundenwic. You step into it at dawn. It smells of wood smoke and wet wool. Unlike Roman Londinium's rigid grid, this place grows organically, like a village that accidentally got ambitious. Timber houses line dirt tracks. Thatched roofs sag slightly under the weight of recent rain. Chickens strut with the confidence of creatures who know they outnumber you. A mainstream historical fact anchors you. Excavations in modern Covent Garden and along the Strand have uncovered dense layers of 7th and 8th century occupation, confirming that Lundenwic was a major Anglo-Saxon trading port. If you've ever watched a performance at the Royal Opera House, congratulations, you were sitting on top of Saxon market stalls. You wander between wooden workshops. A blacksmith hammers iron into tools. A potter spins a wheel with steady rhythm. Traders unload goods from shallow draft boats pulled up along the riverbank. The Thames here is busier again. Roman busy, perhaps, but lively. Amber from the Baltic glows, honey-colored in the morning light. Fine pottery and metalwork travel from Frankish territories. You hear a mix of Old English dialects and continental Germanic tongues. London's multicultural reflex is stretching its limbs again. At its height in the 8th century, Lundenwic may have housed around 8,000 people. Not enormous by later standards, but for early medieval England, it's substantial. You feel the density in the narrow lanes, the hum of barter and gossip. It's less marble and mosaic grandeur, more madame ambition, practicality. Historians still argue whether Lundenwic was a formally planned emporium established by royal authority, or whether it grew more spontaneously through merchant networks. As you watch a local reeve collecting tolls near the waterfront, you suspect a bit of both. Kings love taxes, merchants love rivers, and when those interests align, towns happen. You pause near a small church. Simple, timber-framed Christianity is firmly embedded now. The faith that arrived in Roman times faded, and then returned with renewed missionary zeal in the 6th and 7th centuries is reshaping society. Crosses replace old pagan markers. Monks copy manuscripts in candlelit rooms, occasionally glancing up to make sure the Vikings aren't sailing in. Foreshadowing. Try not to get too comfortable. A quirky tidbit slips into your awareness. Archaeologists have found evidence of specialized production in Lundenwic areas, dedicated almost entirely to bead making. Tiny glass beads, bright and intricate, were crafted here and traded widely. Imagine that. Amid political uncertainty and muddy streets, someone's thinking, you know what this tunic needs. Accessories. The settlement thrives because of trade. Silver coins circulate more widely now. You pick one up, feel its uneven edges. Money has returned in a recognizable form. Markets pulse weekly. Livestock bleats. Ale flows generously. It's not glamorous, but it's alive. Meanwhile, the old Roman city Lundenburg still stands to the east, largely empty. Children dare each other to venture near its looming walls. A Saxon poet later describes Roman ruins as enta guarc, the work of giants. You can almost hear the whispered legends. Giants built those walls, giants laid those stones. Best not to anger them. Yet practicality eventually overcomes superstition. The Roman walls remain strong. Strong walls are useful. But before that realization clicks, another force arrives. From the late 8th century onward, Norse raiders begin probing Britain's coasts. At first, it's hit and run, fast ships, quick plunder, gone before resistance gathers. But the Thames is a tempting artery. You stand on the riverbank one gray morning in 842 and see longships slicing through the mist. The Vikings sack Lundenwic. Smoke rises, echoing Boudica's earlier flames. Timber burns quickly. Goods are seized. Silver disappears into leather pouches. It's not a permanent occupation, yet more a violent reminder that wealth attracts attention. The settlement rebuilds because, of course it does. London's favorite hobby is rebuilding, but the raids intensify. In 851, a larger Viking force overwinters in England for the first time. This isn't just raiding anymore. It's settlement strategy. You feel the anxiety in Lundenwic streets. Merchants glance nervously at the river horizon. Every sail could mean profit or plunder. Historians still argue whether the decline of Lundenwic in the mid-9th century was primarily due to Viking pressure or broader economic shifts. Standing here, watching traders pack goods more hastily than before, it feels like fear plays a role. And then enters Alfred. In 886, King Alfred of Wessex, later known as Alfred the Great, recaptures London from Danish control. You don't see a dramatic Hollywood duel. Instead, you witness something quieter but more strategic. Alfred understands something fundamental. Wooden riverbank settlements are hard to defend. Massive Roman stone walls are not. So he makes a bold decision. He abandons Lundenwic. You watch as families gather belongings, carts creaking under loads of tools, textiles, livestock. They move back inside the old Roman walls. The ghosts of giants will have to make room. Alfred repairs the fortifications, recuts defensive ditches, strengthens gates. The old city becomes Lundenburg fortified burh in the Anglo-Saxon defensive network. A mainstream historical fact steadies the scene. Alfred's burh system was a coordinated network of fortified towns across Wessex. designed to resist Viking incursions. London becomes one of its crown jewels. You step through the restored gates. The Roman street grid, long neglected, now gains new life. Timber buildings rise within stone boundaries. Markets resume, this time protected. The river still flows, but now ships can be monitored from fortified positions. Lundenwic, left behind, slowly empties. Its name evolves into Ealdwickled Settlement. That name survives today in Aldwick, the curved street in central London. You smile at the continuity. 8 centuries from now, commuters will rush over ground once trampled by Saxon traders and nervous chickens. Inside London Burr, life reorganizes. Trade continues, cautiously. Viking threats remain, but walls offer reassurance. You sense a psychological shift. London is no longer just opportunistic river commerce. It's a defensible urban center. Again, coins bearing Alfred's name circulate. Royal authority tightens. Christianity deepens its roots. The city becomes not merely a market town, but a political asset. Yet uncertainty lingers. Danish and Anglo-Saxon forces will contest control in the decades ahead. In 1016, King Canutius, the legendary ruler who supposedly tried to command the tide, will make London his capital. But that's still ahead. For now, you stand in a reborn city within ancient wall. Roman stone, Saxon timber, Viking threttle, layered together. It's messy, improvised, adaptive. You look east toward the river's widening mouth. You look west toward fields that will one day hold Westminster. You feel the city consolidating, not yet grand, but undeniably strategic. London has shifted shape, again first Roman grid, then Saxon sprawl, now fortified burr. Same river, same bend, different mindset. The work of giants has become the shelter of survivors, and the story is only gaining momentum. Nerdishona, Onajai, Choto line, Gulo K Jura, Dai Ibong Boro Linapor. Enter Dai Scripti, Niche, Sayano Hala. You stand atop the repaired Roman wall, looking down at a city that now calls itself Londonburg. The old stone, once dismissed as the work of giants, has become your best friend. Below you, timber houses clustered tightly within the fortifications. Smoke rises in thin blue threads from hearth fire. The Thames glints beyond the eastern gate, no longer just a trade route, but a potential invasion highway. Alfred's decision in 886 to restore and reoccupy the walled city changes everything. You can feel the difference immediately. There's intention now, planning, defensive logic. The Burr system Alfred establishes across his kingdom is not random, it's mathematical. Towns are placed so that no one is more than about 20 miles from a fortified refuge. London is one of the most important of these strongholds. A mainstream historical fact anchors you. Alfred's reorganization of London laid the groundwork for its emergence as England's leading commercial center in the 10th century. Inside the walls, streets begin to align more deliberately. Plots are parceled out. You watch surveyors, pacing distances, measuring with rope. It's not Roman precision, but it's purposeful. Markets resume under protection. Merchants prefer walls to wishful thinking. Still, peace is fragile. The Vikings' Danes mostly are not finished. Throughout the late 9th and 10th centuries, control of London shifts between Anglo-Saxon and Danish rulers. You grow accustomed to uncertainty. One year, coinage bears a Saxon king's name. A few years later, a Danish ruler's. Historians still argue whether the transitions of power in London were marked by violent upheaval or relatively pragmatic accommodation. From your vantage point, it seems a bit of both. Trade has a calming effect. If both sides profit, swords sometimes stay sheathed. By the early 11th century, London is unquestionably important again. In 1016, King Canutefon anglicized as Canute becomes King of England after defeating Edmund Ironside. Yes, this is the same king from the famous legend about commanding the tide to stop. The story, likely exaggerated by later writers, portrays him placing his throne by the sea to demonstrate that even kings cannot control nature. Whether it happened exactly that way is debated, but the symbolism fits London perfectly. The Thames bows to no ruler. Under Canute, London thrives as a royal center. You walk through markets stocked with furs, grain, wine, and imported luxuries. Silver pennies circulate widely. Coin production here is significant. The city's mints are busy, clinking day and night. Wealth hums in the air like a steady drumbeat. Then comes Edward the Confessor. In 1042, Edward ascends to the throne. Unlike some of his predecessors, he has strong Norman ties from years spent in exile in Normandy. And he makes a decision that will shape London's geography for centuries. He builds a grand church and royal palace at Westminster, just west of the city. You stroll along the river toward this new complex. The landscape opens slightly less crowded than within the old walls. Construction is underway on what will become Westminster Abbey. A mainstream historical fact settles into place. Edward's Westminster Abbey, consecrated in 1065, becomes the site of English coronations for nearly 1,000 years afterward. You watch masons carve stone in the Romanesque style influenced by Normandy. This is new architecture for England, arched, solid, unmistakably continental. The division between city and court begins here. The walled city of London handles commerce. Westminster handles kingship. Even today, that split lingers. Finance in the city, politics in Westminster. But history rarely allows calm transitions. Edward dies childless in January 1066. You feel the tension ripple outward instantly. Succession crises are rarely tidy affairs. Harold Godwinson is crowned king, supported by powerful English nobles. Yet across the Channel, William, Duke of Normandy, insists Edward promised him the throne. As if that weren't enough drama, a Norwegian king, Harald Hardrada, also claims England. Because why have one rival when you can have two? You march north with Harold's army in September 1066 to confront the Norwegian invasion. At Stamford Bridge, Harold wins a decisive victory. It's exhausting, but triumphant. You barely have time to celebrate when word arrives. William has landed on the south coast. You feel the fatigue in your legs as you march south again, covering roughly 200 miles in days. On October 14th, 1066, you stand near Hastings. By nightfall, Harold is dead, tradition says with an arrow in his eye. Though historians still argue whether that detail is literal or symbolic, embroidery added later. William wins, and London braces. At first, the city hesitates. It supported Harold. It does not automatically open its gates to the Norman conqueror. William advances cautiously, securing surrounding territories. Eventually, London submits. On Christmas Day, 1066, you stand inside Westminster Abbey as William is crowned King of England. The ceremony is tense. According to some accounts, Norman guards outside mistake the crowd's acclamation for unrest and set nearby buildings ablaze in panic. Nothing says smooth transition like accidental fires during your coronation. William understands one thing clearly. London is powerful. Its merchants are wealthy. Its people are numerous and not easily bullied. So he does what conquerors often do when unsure of loyalty. He builds castles, not one, not two, but at least 3 major fortifications around London to assert Norman authority. The most famous begins rising near the eastern edge of the city, the Tower of London. You watch the White Tower take shape in the 1070s. Thick stone walls, up to 12 feet in places, about 90 feet high, stark, imposing. It dominates the skyline. A mainstream historical fact grounds you. Construction of the White Tower began around 1078 under William's orders. It is both fortress and statement, a message carved in canstone. We are here and we are not leaving. A quirky tidbit lingers in your thoughts. Some of the stone used in the White Tower is imported from Normandy, reinforcing the Norman connection physically and symbolically. Imagine hauling heavy stone across the Channel just to make sure everyone remembers who's in charge. Subtlety was not William's strong suit. Inside the city walls, life continues, though now under Norman rule. French becomes the language of the elite. Old English persists among common folk. You hear the linguistic blending that will eventually produce Middle English, a fusion born of conquest. Markets still bustle. Guild structures begin to solidify. London's merchants negotiate privileges with the crown. William, pragmatic, confirms certain rights and liberties to secure loyalty. He knows better than to strangle the goose that lays golden taxes. You walk along the Thames at twilight. To the east, the Tower looms pale and severe. To the west, Westminster's new stone abbey stands dignified and solemn. Between them lies a city, increasingly confident in its economic leverage. Historians still argue whether William's castle building in London was primarily defensive against foreign threats or suppressive toward the local population. Standing beneath the White Tower's shadow, you suspect the answer is yes. The skyline has changed again. Roman walls, Saxon timber, Norman stone. You can feel the foundations of medieval London settling into place. Commerce inside the city. Royal authority at Westminster. Military power at the Tower. The river flows steadily past all of it, reflecting torchlight and moonlight alike. London has endured Roman abandonment, Saxon superstition, Viking raids. Now it absorbs Norman ambition, and it's only getting started. You wake to bells, not the gentle, scattered chime of a village church, but a layered thunder rolling across the Thames. London, in the 12th and 13th centuries, does not whisper, it rings. Parish bells mark time, signal danger, celebrate saints, and occasionally announce someone important enough to be buried with ceremony. The Norman conquest is no longer fresh. It has settled into stone. The Tower of London stands complete in its early form, white and imposing. But something subtle has shifted. It is no longer just a symbol of domination. It is becoming part of London's identity. Kings store treasure here. Prisoners of rank are confined here. Royal documents are safeguarded here. The fortress that once intimidated now legitimizes. Meanwhile, the city inside the Roman walls is swelling. By the 1100s, London is the largest city in England and one of the largest in Europe. A mainstream historical fact anchors you. By around 1200, London's population may have reached 40,000 to 60,000 people. Enormous by medieval standards. You squeeze through narrow lanes where upper stories lean toward each other so closely that neighbors could almost shake hands from opposite windows. Timber frames creak. The smell is layered. Wood smoke, animal dung, ale, fish, humanity. Hygiene is not London's strong suit, but commerce is. At the riverside, ships crowd the quays. Wool, England's golden export, moves through the city in vast quantities. Foreign merchants from Flanders, France, and the Hanseatic ports negotiate in a mixture of languages. Silver pennies change hands constantly. London's power now rests less on swords and more on contracts. In 1191, while King Richard I is away on crusade, London asserts something remarkable. It briefly recognizes itself as a commune, a form of sworn civic association common in continental Europe. This signals a growing sense of corporate identity. The citizens are no longer just subjects, they are a body. That identity crystallizes further in 1215. You stand among a tense crowd as news spreads of King John's conflict with his barons. Taxes have been heavy. Military campaigns have failed. Resentment boils. Although the sealing of Magna Carta happens at Runnymede west of London, the city plays a crucial role in pressuring the king. The rebels capture London. That fact matters. Control of London means leverage. On June 15, 1215, King John seals the Magna Carta, a mainstream historical fact. Magna Carta establishes the principle that the king is subject to the law, not above it. Was it democracy? No. It primarily protected baronial rights. But London's merchants and citizens are explicitly granted recognition of their ancient liberties. The city's autonomy strengthens. You can feel it in the Guildhall. London's guilds are solidifying into powerful institutions. Bakers regulate bread quality and prices. Goldsmiths enforce purity standards. Fishmongers guard river rights fiercely. Membership is economic survival. And then there is the mayor. In 1189, London begins appointing a mayor annually, a position that grows in authority through the 13th century. By 1215, the right of Londoners to elect their own mayor is formally acknowledged. Civic government is no small thing in medieval Europe. You walk past the old Roman amphitheater site, now largely forgotten beneath layers of construction, and continue toward the heart of the city, where the new Gothic cathedral rises. Old St. Paul's Cathedral, begun in 1087 after a fire destroyed its predecessor, dominates the skyline. Its spire will eventually soar over 500 feet, making it one of the tallest buildings in medieval Europe. Construction stretches across generations. Cathedrals are not built, they evolve. Fire remains London's constant companion. Major blazes in 1135 and 1212 tear through wooden structures with terrifying speed. The 1212 fire is particularly deadly, reportedly killing thousands, though medieval chroniclers often exaggerate numbers. Historians debate the scale of casualties, but the destruction was unquestionably severe. After each fire, the city rebuilds, slightly more regulated, slightly more cautious. Stone begins to replace timber in wealthier districts. Regulations attempt to control thatched roofing, but enforcement is uneven. Profit often outruns safety. You notice something else changing. Bridges. The old wooden London Bridge is replaced in the late 12th century by a massive stone structure. Construction begins in 1176 under the supervision of Peter of Colechurch. It will take over 30 years to complete. When you finally walk across the finished medieval London Bridge, it does not feel like a simple crossing. It feels like a town. Houses line both sides of the bridge. Shops occupy lower levels. A chapel stands at the center. The river roars through narrow arches below, sometimes violently enough to make passage by boat hazardous. The bridge is both infrastructure and real estate venture. A quirky but true detail. The heads of executed traitors will eventually be displayed on spikes above London Bridge's gatehouse. Welcome to town. By the late 13th century, London's population may approach 80,000. It is noisy, stratified, ambitious. Royal courts increasingly sit at Westminster. Parliament begins taking more recognizable form under Edward I in the late 1200s. Representatives from shires and boroughs, including London, are summoned. The split between city and crown sharpens but stabilizes. The monarchy needs London's wealth. London needs royal charters. You wander through Cheapside, the main market street. Jewelers, cloth merchants, spice traders, apprentices dart between customers. Street criers shout prices. Pickpockets test opportunity. You pass the Jewish quarter, a reminder of another thread in London's medieval story. Jewish communities, present since Norman times, play important roles in money lending due to restrictions on Christian usury. But resentment grows. In 1290, Edward I expels Jews from England entirely. It will be more than 350 years before Jews are officially readmitted. London's tolerance, like its sanitation, is inconsistent. And yet, something remarkable persists. Despite fires, political turmoil, and occasional violence, the city keeps growing. Its legal identity strengthens. Its merchants expand influence. Its architecture reaches upward. At dusk, you stand near the river and watch torchlight flicker along the stone walls, the cathedral tower, the bridge houses. Roman foundations beneath your feet. Norman stone above your head. English law evolving in between. London is no longer merely surviving conquest. It is shaping the rules of power. And shadows are gathering again, not from invaders this time, but from something smaller, quieter, and far deadlier. Soon, the bells will ring for a different reason. The bells do not stop. Not the gentle, scattered chime of a village church, but a layered thunder rolling across the Thames. At first, it is one parish, then another, then all of them. By 1348, whispers move faster than ships along the Thames. A sickness has come from the continent. It has already devastated cities in Italy and France. Now it enters London through its ports, invisible, efficient, unstoppable. You do not see armies, you see carts. The Black Death reaches London in 1348 to 1349, a mainstream historical fact. Historians estimate that between 1/3 and 1/2 of London's population dies within roughly 18 months. If the city held perhaps 70,000 to 80,000 people, tens of thousands vanish. The transformation is immediate. Shops close, apprentices disappear, priests die faster than they can administer last rites, cemeteries overflow. New burial grounds are opened outside the city walls. Chroniclers describe mass graves, though exact numbers remain debated. The air smells of fear and limewash. Medical understanding is limited. Some blame foul air, others blame divine punishment. A few target minority communities, as happens tragically across Europe. But mostly, people pray and wait. When the wave finally recedes, London is quieter, labor is scarce. Survivors realize something powerful. Their work is now worth more. Wages begin to rise. Landowners and authorities push back, attempting to freeze wages at pre-plague levels. Tension builds beneath the surface of daily life. You walk through streets where weeds grow between stones once polished by constant traffic. Entire houses stand empty. Yet life, stubborn as ever, pushes forward. By the 1360s and 1370s, London begins to recover. Population slowly climbs again. Trade resumes. Guilds reorganize. But inequality sharpens. Wealth concentrates among surviving merchants and property holders who acquire vacant land cheaply. Then comes 1381. The spark is taxation. Specifically, a series of poll taxes meant to fund war with France. The burden falls heavily on common people. Anger spreads from rural Essex and Kent toward the capital. You hear them before you see them. Thousands of rebels march on London in what becomes known as the Peasants Revolt. Led in part by Wat Tyler and inspired by radical preacher John Ball, they demand an end to serfdom, fairer rents, and justice. London's gates are opened, perhaps by sympathetic citizens. The rebels pour in. You stand near the Tower of London as chaos unfolds. Rebels storm the fortress. They capture and execute key royal officials, including the Archbishop of Canterbury. It is a stunning breach of royal authority. For a moment, it seems the old order might collapse. 14-year-old King Richard II meets the rebels at Smithfield. Accounts differ in detail. Medieval chroniclers often dramatize, but a core fact stands. During negotiations, Wat Tyler is killed, possibly by the Lord Mayor of London. The crowd falters. Richard addresses them directly, asserting himself as their leader and promising reforms. The rebellion loses cohesion. Over the following days, royal forces regain control. Promises are quietly withdrawn. Historians still debate how close England came to structural revolution in 1381. Standing there, dust in your throat and tension in the air, It feels closer than later narratives sometimes admit. Yet, even failed revolts leave marks. Serfdom does not vanish overnight, but it declines steadily in the decades that follow. Labor mobility increases. The social structure loosens, if unevenly. London continues evolving. By the 15th century, it is again England's undisputed economic heart. Its merchants, finance, wool exports, cloth production, and international trade networks stretching into the Baltic and Mediterranean. You walk into the Guildhall during a civic ceremony, fur-lined robes, gold chains, carefully choreographed authority. The Lord Mayor presides with confidence that rivals minor nobility. A mainstream historical fact settles in. By the late medieval period, the City of London operates with a remarkable degree of self-governance, maintaining courts, officials, and regulatory systems largely independent of direct royal control, so long as loyalty and taxes are maintained. But stability proves temporary once more. In the mid-15th century, dynastic tension erupts into the Wars of the Roses, a struggle between the houses of Lancaster and York. London becomes a political prize again. Control of the capital means legitimacy. You witness uneasy shifts in banners and allegiances. One year, a Lancastrian king, another, a Yorkist, then back again. Merchants adapt pragmatically. Trade must continue, no matter whose rose flies above the tower. Battles occur mostly outside the city, but London feels the tremors. Executions follow regime changes. Heads once again appear on London Bridge. By 1485, a decisive battle at Bosworth Field brings Henry Tudor to the throne as Henry VII, ending the Wars of the Roses and beginning the Tudor dynasty. London exhales. The medieval era, defined by plague, revolt, guild power, and contested kingship, begins to give way to something sharper, more centralized, more modern. Population grows again. Suburbs creep beyond the old Roman walls. Printing presses begin operating in Westminster by the late 15th century, spreading ideas faster than any town crier could. You stand on London Bridge at dusk. Behind you, the clustered medieval city, cathedral spire, guild halls, timbered homes. To the west, Westminster's royal complex strengthens its gravitational pull. Barges glide along the Thames, carrying nobles, merchants, fish, and rumors. London has survived pestilence that killed half its people. It has endured rebellion that nearly toppled royal authority. It has navigated civil war without losing its commercial pulse. The city is no longer just reacting to history. It is shaping national destiny. And ahead lies a century of religious upheaval, theatrical brilliance, maritime ambition, and a king who will break from Rome and reshape London's skyline yet again. The air feels charged. The Tudors are coming. The air changes before the skyline does. By the early 1500s, London is swelling again, perhaps 100,000 people or more. Timber houses press tightly within the old Roman walls, but suburbs are creeping outward. Southwark, across the Thames, is alive with inns, taverns, and entertainments that the stricter authorities inside the city prefer to keep at arm's length. And at the center of everything stands a king who does not like being told no. In 1509, Henry VIII ascends the throne. At first, London celebrates him, athletic, charismatic, Renaissance-educated, but within decades, his desire for an annulment and for control will reshape England and the capital permanently. You feel the tension build in the 1520s. The king wants his marriage to Catherine of Aragon annulled. The Pope refuses. Henry responds not with retreat, but with rupture. In the 1530s, England breaks from Rome. The English Reformation transforms London physically as well as spiritually. Monasteries, priories, and convents, once major landowners and providers of charity, are dissolved. Their lands are seized by the crown. You walk past one sacred precincts, now stripped and repurposed. Stone is carted away. Lead roofs are melted down. Libraries scatter. Some monastic buildings become private mansions. Others decay. A mainstream historical fact anchors the moment between 1536 and 1541. Hundreds of religious houses across England are dissolved under royal authority. The skyline changes subtly but decisively. Religious authority shifts from Rome to the monarch. Wealth flows into royal coffers and into the hands of ambitious London merchants who purchase former church lands. A new elite emerges, commercially savvy, politically connected. London grows bolder. Under Elizabeth I, who takes the throne in 1558 after a turbulent succession, the city becomes something else entirely. Confident, theatrical, outward-looking. Population surges toward 200,000 by 1600. It is now one of Europe's largest cities, and it is loud. You cross the Thames into Southwark and see something extraordinary. Purpose-built playhouses. The most famous rises in 1599, the Globe Theatre. Here, audiences of all classes gather to watch the works of William Shakespeare and his contemporaries. This is not quiet court entertainment. It is public drama. Groundlings stand shoulder to shoulder in the yard. Nobles sit in galleries. Vendors shout. Pickpockets work. Actors project to the open sky. A quirky but true detail. Theaters are often closed during outbreaks of plague. When deaths rise above a certain threshold, authorities suspend performances. Art yields to contagion temporarily. London is also turning outward to the sea. In 1600, merchants receive a royal charter establishing the East India Company. At first, it is simply a commercial venture seeking spices and trade routes, but you can sense the long shadow forming. London's docks will soon tie the city to global networks of commerce and empire. At the Royal Exchange, founded earlier in 1565 by Sir Thomas Gresham, merchants discuss risk and opportunity beneath elegant arcades. Financial sophistication deepens. Insurance, joint stock ventures, overseas speculation. The city and Westminster remain distinct but intertwined. Royal courts glitter to the west. Commerce pulses to the east. Then comes fire again, though not yet the one history remembers most. In 1561, the spire of Old St. Paul's Cathedral is struck by lightning and burns. It is never fully restored to its former medieval height. The cathedral still dominates, but its vulnerability is obvious. Religion continues to oscillate violently during the 16th century. Under Henry's son, Edward VI, Protestant reforms accelerate. Under Mary I, Catholicism is restored and Protestants are persecuted. Under Elizabeth, a Protestant settlement stabilizes the realm, though not without tension. Londoners learn adaptability as survival skill. By the early 1600s, under James I, who unites the English and Scottish crowns in 1603, London is a metropolis of contrasts, glittering court masks and muddy alleys, global trade and open sewers, intellectual vibrancy and persistent poverty. You wander through Cheapside and see imported silks, sugar, tobacco. You pass apprentices carrying bolts of cloth, sailors fresh from voyages, scholars debating theology. Yet overcrowding intensifies. Sanitation remains primitive. Disease lingers in cycles. In 1605, you feel a different kind of tremor, political and explosive. The gunpowder plot aims to blow up king and parliament at Westminster. The conspiracy fails. Guy Fawkes is arrested beneath the House of Lords. London reacts with shock and then ritualized celebration. Bonfires will mark the date for centuries. Historians still debate how unified Londoners truly were in religious allegiance during this period. Official conformity often masked private belief, but one thing is clear: London's identity is no longer purely medieval. It is commercial, theatrical, maritime, and increasingly global. As twilight falls, you stand on London Bridge again. Houses still line it, heads no longer decorated as frequently, but authority remains visible. To the east, ships crowd the Pool of London. To the west, Westminster's silhouette grows ever more politically central. The population may now exceed 250,000 by the 1620s. London is the beating heart of a kingdom stepping onto the world stage. But beneath prosperity lies fragility. Political tension between crown and parliament is rising. Religious divisions simmer. Urban density makes the city perpetually vulnerable to disease and to something even more destructive. Within a generation, London will face plague on a scale unseen since the 14th century. And then, fire, not a lightning strike this time, but an inferno that will erase much of the medieval city in days. For now, though, the theaters are full, the ships are sailing, and London believes its ascent has only begun. Nerdishona, Anyugai, Choto Line, Gulo, Kajora, Diabongboro, Lina Por, Enter Dai, Scripti Niche, Sayano, Hala. The streets of London hum with anticipation, though most people do not yet know why. You walk past timber-framed houses, their upper stories leaning perilously over narrow alleys, and smell smoke from countless hearths. The air is thick, sticky with soot and human activity, but somehow alive, a constant pulse of commerce, chatter, and occasionally dread. By the 1620s and 1630s, London has become the largest city in England, a bustling hub of trade, culture, and politics. The population hovers around 350,000 to 400,000. You feel the crowd pressing in on every side. Merchants shout over one another, hawking imported goods, spices from India, silk from Italy, sugar from the Caribbean. Apprentices run errands, clutching ledgers or carrying bundles of fabric, and dock workers haul barrels along the Thames. Ships crowd the Pool of London, their sails and masts forming a forest of timber and rope, brimming with both opportunity and risk. Yet beneath this prosperity lurks fragility. Disease is never far, and every spring brings fear of contagion. In 1625, plague returns, not the Black Death, but a severe outbreak nonetheless. Thousands die, particularly in the crowded neighborhoods east of the city walls. Streets empty as the wealthy flee to their country estates, leaving the poor trapped in dense, unsanitary quarters. Lime and herbs offer little comfort. Superstition mixes with early attempts at public health. The medical understanding is rudimentary, with physicians and barber surgeons experimenting in vain. The city's architecture mirrors both ambition and danger. Timber remains king. Overhanging upper floors create narrow, winding streets that let little sun in and trap smoke. Chimneys leak sparks. Open fires cook meals in nearly every dwelling. Every building, no matter how grand, is a tinderbox waiting for a spark. And that spark comes in September 1666, though the city won't realize its fate for hours. But before we get there, let's linger on the culture and contradictions of early Stuart London. Theaters continue to flourish after the Elizabethan peak. The Globe has been rebuilt after a fire in 1613, now staging Shakespeare's later plays. Audiences cheer, heckle, and sometimes even brawl in the yard. Coffeehouses begin to emerge, especially around Fleet Street and Lombard Street, becoming hubs of debate, rumor, and nascent journalism. Jonathan's Coffee House, for instance, attracts traders who will eventually formalize the London Stock Exchange. Meanwhile, religious tensions simmer. Catholics remain a minority, often distrusted and persecuted, while Puritans push for moral reform of the theaters and public life. King Charles I's conflicts with Parliament over taxation and religion will, in a few decades, ignite civil war. But for now, life continues in a precarious balance, the city's wealth and vibrancy masking underlying fragility. Quirky detail: the Southwark area is infamous for its bear-baiting pits, which attract audiences and gambling alike. Historians still argue whether the popularity of such spectacles reflects sheer cruelty or a city craving communal entertainment in dangerous times. As you wander along the Thames, you notice small bridges connecting the riverbanks, crowded with shops and homes. London Bridge, rebuilt in stone decades earlier, remains the only crossing of the Thames within the city, lined with houses precariously perched above the water. The river is both lifeline and hazard. Commerce flows, but so do waste and disease. By the time you turn back toward Cheapside, the streets are alive with the smell of roasting meats, the clatter of carts, and the sharp temps of tension. London feels unstoppable, yet it teeters on the edge of catastrophe. In just a few decades, fire and plague will collide, reshaping the city forever, and the skyline you now know will vanish in smoke. The year is 1665. You probably wouldn't want to be wandering the streets, but here you are, tramping past muddy alleys, crowded marketplaces, and narrow courtyards, where children chase each other around piles of refuse. The smell is thick, a mixture of cooking fire, human waste, and the Thames' ever-present funk. It's London in its rawest form, vibrant, messy, and teetering on the edge of disaster. The plague has returned. Not the medieval Black Death, exactly, but a severe outbreak of Great Plague of London. The population is around 500,000, yet within months, tens of thousands will die. You trudge past homes, hastily boarded up with chalked doors. Warning, Lord have mercy upon us, while neighbors peer anxiously from upstairs windows. Entire streets are abandoned. Corpses are stacked in hastily dug mass graves outside the city walls. Candles flicker at night in defiance of despair, and watchmen patrol for plague victims wandering about. The city feels suspended in a grim reality. Merchants shutter their shops, taverns close. Even the theaters, a lifeline of social life, sit empty, echoing with ghostly silence. The wealthy escape to the countryside, leaving the poor trapped in filth and fear. Lime, herbs, and garlic are sprinkled in hopes of warding off infection. Some cling to superstition. Bells are rung to purify the air, while others flee, convinced that the plague is a divine punishment. Historians still argue whether these measures actually slowed the disease or merely provided a sense of control. By 1666, London is on edge, but largely unaware of the impending catastrophe. On September 2nd, the first flames ignite at a bakery on Pudding Lane. You smell the acrid temps of smoke before you see the fire, climbing quickly in the dry, hot air. Strong winds whip the flames into a frenzy. For 4 days, London burns Great Fire of London, consuming 85% of the city within the walls. Houses, mostly timber with thatched roofs, vanish in minutes. Narrow streets become choked with heat and smoke. You trudge past neighbors, frantically trying to save belongings. Buckets of water splashing uselessly against advancing walls of fire. Churches crumble. St. Paul's Cathedral, the medieval one, collapses into embers. Remarkably, only a handful of lives are lost directly to the fire. But more than 100,000 Londoners are left homeless. The chaos is complete, but Londoners are resilient. Architect Christopher Wren sees opportunity amid the ashes. He envisions a modern, rational city, wide boulevards, grand squares, and classical architecture. Yet his vision largely fails. Property rights, urgency, and resistance to change mean most streets are rebuilt along medieval patterns. Stone and brick replace timber to prevent future fires. Wren does manage to reconstruct St. Paul's Cathedral, a bold, iconic dome rising from the ruins, still dominating the skyline centuries later. London's character shifts with each disaster. The plague reminded citizens of mortality. The fire taught resilience and adaptability. Trade resumed. Theaters reopen, and the city slowly rebuilds. Merchants, aristocrats, and ordinary Londoners alike claim pieces of the new city. Quirky fact, during reconstruction, temporary shantytowns spring up near the Thames, often more chaotic than the original city, with riverside workers improvising dwellings from barrels and planks. By the late 17th century, London is physically transformed, but socially and economically poised for expansion. Population growth accelerates, trade flourishes with Europe and the New World, and beneath it all, the city hums with a tension that will define its next century: energy, ambition, and the ever-present shadow of risk. Historians still argue whether London could have avoided such disasters if urban planning had been more centralized. But one thing is certain: these catastrophes forged a city that learned to rise from its own ashes repeatedly. Nerdishona, Anyujai, Choto Line Gulo, K. Jora, die, Ibong Boro, Lina, por, inter, die, scripti, niche, Siano, hala. You step into 18th century London, and it's like walking into a city, straining at the seams, eager to prove itself to the world. The streets are wider than in Stuart times, but still busy, bustling, and oddly fragrant. The combination of coal smoke, horse manure, and the occasional waft of exotic spices from ships docking at the Pool of London. Population estimates hover around 600,000 by the early 1700s, making London not only England's largest city, but one of Europe's most influential. Commerce dominates. Merchants shout over one another in Cheapside, negotiating contracts for sugar, tobacco, silk, and tea. Coffee houses proliferate, particularly in the City and Westminster. Jonathan's Coffee House hosts traders, forming early versions of stock exchanges. Lloyd's Coffee House caters to merchants and ship owners, eventually giving rise to the insurance giant we know today. These spaces are buzzing with information, gossip, and speculation, sometimes the only barrier between fortune and ruin. Culture pulses too. Art, music, and literature thrive, supported by an elite increasingly interested in sophistication and social status. The theater continues to flourish. Audiences attend plays by John Dryden and Aphra Behn. Meanwhile, the general populace enjoys fairs, bear baiting, and even early forms of street entertainment. Quirky detail: street performers known as balladmongers sell songs of scandal, love, and crime printed on single sheets, essentially early tabloids. Historians still argue whether these publications shaped public opinion or merely reflected it. London is also expanding physically. Westminster bridges gaps between commercial and political hubs. Buckingham House, purchased by George III in 1761, marks the beginnings of the royal family's later dominance in the cityscape. Nobility and wealthy merchants build grand townhouses in Mayfair and Belgravia, while artisans, laborers, and the poor remain packed into dense East End neighborhoods. Inequality is stark and visible, creating both tension and opportunity for social mobility. Trade routes extend further than ever. London connects with India, the Caribbean, Africa, and Europe. The East India Company thrives, bringing spices, textiles, and wealth to the city. Ships unload cargo in tightly packed docks, and the Thames is alive with longboats, wherries, and merchantmen. Fishermen, dockworkers, and apprentices create a constant human hum along the riverbanks. Yet, vulnerability persists. Fires remain a danger despite new building regulations, and smallpox and other diseases still stalk crowded neighborhoods. Cholera outbreaks loom in the future, though contemporary medical knowledge is rudimentary. Londoners rely on herbal remedies, religious ritual, and crude sanitation measures, often more symbolic than effective. You feel the paradox everywhere. London is a center of enlightenment, innovation, and commerce, yet it remains precarious. Coffee houses, theaters, and guilds symbolize knowledge, while crowded slums and narrow streets remind you that disaster lurks nearby. Bonfires, street cries, and early newspapers punctuate life with urgency, tension, and an unmistakable pulse that defines this era. By mid-century, London has established itself as a global capital of commerce, culture, and intellect. The population continues to swell, dockyards hum with trade, and the city's skyline is a jumble of spires, chimneys, and the occasional classical facade. Quirky fact: wealthier Londoners begin using pocket globes, tiny handheld maps, to track colonial territories, a symbol of both curiosity and ambition. Historians still debate how much the city's elite really cared about the welfare of ordinary Londoners. But one thing is clear: the seeds of modern London, financial innovation, cultural dominance, and global reach are firmly planted. The city is poised to grow faster, taller, and more influential than ever. And you can almost feel the energy of the Industrial Revolution lurking on the horizon, ready to transform London in ways that will make everything before it look quaint and small. You move into early 19th century London, and the city's pulse has accelerated. The streets are now dominated by the clatter of hooves on cobblestones, the hiss of steam engines, and the constant shouts of street vendors hawking everything from bread to newspapers. Population has exploded past 2 million by 1851, and the city is a sprawling, chaotic behemoth. London is no longer just a center of trade and culture. It's the beating heart of an industrial empire. Factories rise along the Thames and in the East End. Smokestacks pierce the skyline, spewing coal smoke that mixes with fog to create the notorious London smog. You trudge past rows of terraced houses, each jammed tightly against its neighbor. Narrow courts where entire families live in a single room. Child labor is rampant. You glimpse young boys and girls scurrying through streets, delivering coal, sweeping chimneys, or working in textile mills. Quirky detail. Some children serve as mudlarks, scavenging the Thames for coins and small treasures during low tide. A dangerous, yet oddly lucrative occupation. Historians still argue whether urban child labor drove economic growth or merely exploited the city's poor. Infrastructure struggles to keep pace. Streets are congested. Horses pull heavy carts along narrow lanes. Sewage flows openly in many areas, contributing to periodic cholera outbreaks. In 1854, Dr. John Snow maps a cholera outbreak in Soho, realizing that contaminated water, not air, spreads the disease. This marks a turning point in urban public health, though for now, most of London's population remains vulnerable to outbreaks. Despite the hardships, innovation flourishes. The Great Exhibition of 1851, held in Hyde Park's Crystal Palace, dazzles visitors with iron and glass marvels from Britain and across the globe. You marvel at machinery, exotic artifacts, and displays of industrial prowess. Over 6 million visitors attend, nearly a quarter of the nation's population, demonstrating London's ability to attract people, ideas, and commerce on an unprecedented scale. Transport is transforming. The London Underground opens in 1863, a subterranean labyrinth carrying thousands beneath the city's crowded streets. Railways expand outward, linking London to industrial towns across England. The Thames is lined with warehouses, docks, and wharves, constantly teeming with activity. Tower Bridge is planned, though its eventual completion will come decades later, an engineering marvel of bascule and suspension. Life in Victorian London is marked by stark contrasts. In Mayfair and Belgravia, aristocrats and industrial magnates live in luxury, attending operas, commissioning art, and hosting salons. Meanwhile, in Whitechapel and the East End, poverty is extreme. You pass overcrowded slums where families share damp rooms, work in factories, and risk disease daily. Quirky fact: during this period, Londoners adopt a fascination with phrenology, measuring skulls to supposedly determine character traits, a pseudoscience that entertained both elites and curious street audiences. Crime and danger shadow the streets. In 1829, Sir Robert Peel establishes the Metropolitan Police Service, giving rise to the first organized modern police force. Bobbies patrol the streets, attempting to enforce order in a city teeming with opportunity and risk. Yet law enforcement struggles to manage the chaotic growth. By 1888, Whitechapel becomes synonymous with terror as Jack the Ripper stalks the alleys, murdering at least 5 women. His identity remains a mystery, fueling urban legend and public fear. The city's cultural life continues to thrive. Charles Dickens captures the extremes of London society in his novels, the wealthy, the poor, and the moral ambiguities that tie them together. Museums, theaters, and public lecture halls proliferate. The press expands, printing newspapers for the literate working class and providing a forum for social debate. London is a hub of innovation, commerce, and spectacle, but also a cauldron of social tension. Historians still debate whether the Industrial Revolution ultimately improved living standards or deepened inequality in cities like London. Either way, the changes are tangible. Streets brimming with people, steam rising from factories, the sounds of hammers and engines echoing through alleys, and the faint, ever-present scent of coal. London is now a city of contrasts, wealth and poverty, innovation and danger, culture and chaos, all layered atop centuries of history that continue to shape it. The 20th century begins, and London is both ancient and modern, carrying centuries of history in every street while racing toward the future. You step onto a tram-filled street in 1901, the population now over 6 million, making it the largest city in the world. The air smells of coal smoke, horse dung, and the faint tang of the Thames, just as it always has, but now mixed with the crisp scent of new asphalt and machine oil from factories and docks. London is a metropolis in constant motion, a city that never truly sleeps. Electric trams and newly motorized buses rattle past you as you navigate the crowded sidewalks. The Victorians have left their mark, the Gothic revival of the Houses of Parliament. Big Ben's chimes marking time, and the imposing banks along the city's streets. Street markets thrive alongside luxury shops. The contrast between Mayfair opulence and East End poverty is impossible to ignore. Quirky detail: in 1900, it was fashionable for some wealthy Londoners to carry anti-gas masks in their carriages. Worried about pollution, though most people laughed at the idea, a kind of prelude to later wartime paranoia. Historians still argue whether these early health measures were genuinely practical or just a sign of the city's obsession with self-preservation. World War I casts its shadow over the city. You hear the distant whistle of trains carrying soldiers to ports, the solemn clatter of boots marching off to France. Tens of thousands of Londoners die, and grief touches nearly every household. Yet the city's infrastructure remains largely intact, and life adapts. Women fill jobs vacated by men at war, factories hum, and society begins shifting slowly toward modernity. But it's World War II that tests London like no other. The Blitz begins in September 1940, and you trudge past streets illuminated not by gas lamps, but by fiery explosions from Luftwaffe bombers. Entire neighborhoods are leveled in relentless air raids. The city's people endure nightly sirens, shelters, and blackout curtains. Remarkably, St. Paul's Cathedral stands defiant amid clouds of smoke, a symbol of endurance captured in photographs that will echo through history. The human cost is staggering. Nearly 500,000 souls lost, 1 million buildings damaged or destroyed. Yet Londoners adapt, rebuild, and keep moving, their resolve as constant as the Thames beneath them. Post-war London is exhausted, impoverished, and adjusting to a shrinking empire. India gains independence in 1947, and the city watches the end of its colonial reach. Rationing continues into the 1950s, and a thick smog, the Great Smog of 1952, settles over the city, killing 12,000 in just 5 days. You trudge past coughing neighbors, the air so thick it turns street lamps into hazy orbs, and the Thames an almost mystical gray ribbon winding through a battered city. Yet London rebuilds. The 1951 Festival of Britain signals optimism, a celebration of science, design, and culture. Brutalist towers rise from the rubble, and the welfare state expands. Crucially, the city opens its arms to new arrivals. The Windrush generation from the Caribbean arrives in 1948, soon followed by waves of immigration from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Africa, and Eastern Europe. You hear over 300 languages spoken as children play in streets lined with terraced houses, mosques, temples, and Caribbean markets. London becomes a mosaic layered with culture, languages, and traditions from across the globe. The 1960s usher in a cultural explosion. Swinging London, Carnaby Street, Mary Quant's, fashions, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, clubs, and music halls. The city feels young again, vibrant and rebellious. Quirky fact: some Londoners embraced space-age decor, covering interiors with metallic wallpaper and futuristic furniture, a fleeting obsession reflecting post-war optimism. Historians still argue whether this cultural renaissance genuinely transformed society or merely masked economic struggles. Tensions return in the following decades. Economic decline, strikes, and terrorism from the IRA. Docklands are abandoned, East End neighborhoods neglected, but redevelopment soon reshapes London once more. Canary Wharf rises from the derelict docks, banks and financial institutions dominate the skyline, and London reclaims its place as a global financial hub. Glass and steel towers pierce the skyline alongside centuries-old stone buildings, symbolizing the city's ability to embrace both heritage and innovation. By the turn of the 21st century, London is unrecognizable in scale, but deeply familiar in spirit. The Millennium Dome, a controversial start to the new century, eventually transforms into the O2 Arena, drawing millions. The 2012 Olympics rejuvenate East London, leaving lasting infrastructure and pride. Population surpasses 9 million, diversity reaches unprecedented levels, and neighborhoods retain their unique global character. From Caribbean Brixton to South Asian Chinatown, Turkish Enfield, and Polish Hammersmith. Historians still debate whether modern development truly honors London's past or sacrifices character for efficiency. But one fact remains indisputable: London endures, grows, and adapts. Its history, etched into streets, buildings, and the rhythm of daily life, continues to inform the future. Every tram, every skyscraper, every multicultural market tells the story of a city that survived plagues, fires, wars, and economic upheaval, yet kept its identity alive. Walking into contemporary London, the city feels alive in a way that would overwhelm even the most seasoned time traveler. The skyline is a patchwork. Centuries-old spires peek out between glass and steel towers, like the Shard, the Gherkin, and the Walkie-Talkie Building. All are vying for attention, while echoing the city's ever-changing ambition. You hear the hum of traffic, the rumble of the underground, and snippets of hundreds of languages, a reminder that London has long been a magnet for the world's people. Modern London is a story of contrasts, old and new, wealth and poverty, heritage and innovation. In the West End, theaters and shops thrive, attracting tourists and locals alike. Meanwhile, neighborhoods like the East End have undergone waves of gentrification, displacing some communities even as they welcome new activity. Quirky detail. Street artists sometimes paint miniature time travelers in alleys, tiny figures observing the city as it changes. An unofficial homage to London's layered history. Historians still argue whether these urban art movements meaningfully engage with history or serve purely aesthetic purposes. Cultural diversity defines the city today. Walk through Brixton and smell the spicy temps of Caribbean jerk chicken, mingling with the scent of fresh bread from a Nigerian bakery. In Southall, the air vibrates with the rhythm of South Asian markets, while Chinatown offers a symphony of flavors and languages. Hammersmith hosts Polish bakeries, Turkish cafes, and Ethiopian restaurants within a single block. London has become a living archive of human migration, a mosaic of traditions coexisting and blending. London is an economic powerhouse. Canary Wharf and the city continue to dominate global finance. Investment firms, banks, and tech companies shape the skyline, attracting talent from around the world. Meanwhile, startups, creative industries, and cultural institutions inject vitality into previously neglected areas. Quirky fact: the financial district has rooftop beekeeping initiatives, a nod to sustainability in a concrete jungle. Historians still debate whether London's global economic dominance fosters local inequality or benefits all strata of society. Infrastructure continues to evolve. The underground, now more than 150 years old, threads the city with efficiency. Bike lanes, electric buses, and pedestrianized zones reflect efforts to adapt to climate concerns. Crossrail, one of Europe's largest transport projects, links distant boroughs, reminding you that London's expansion has never been purely horizontal. The city moves both above and below the ground, creating layers of connectivity unseen in most metropolises. Yet, London remains vulnerable. Social inequality persists, housing prices soar, and the city grapples with pollution and congestion. Security, terrorism, and public health continue to test civic resilience, echoing the crises of centuries past. The city's history, from Roman marshes to the Blitz, seems to whisper a warning. Survival demands adaptation, creativity, and community. Despite these challenges, London pulses with life. Festivals celebrate every culture imaginable, and the Thames remains the city's lifeline. Quirky tidbit: river ferries sometimes offer yoga classes or silent disco nights, blending tradition with modern quirks. You notice how heritage buildings, like the Tower of London and St. Paul's Cathedral, anchor the city's identity. Walking through contemporary London, you realize that diversity is not just demographic, it's historical. The city remembers its past while reinventing itself continuously. The shouts of merchants, the roar of engines, and now the chatter of multi-ethnic communities form a continuous symphony. Historians still argue whether London's identity is rooted more in its physical landmarks or in its people. But the truth seems clear. It is both, inseparably entwined. From the Thameside docks to the narrow alleyways of Whitechapel, the city tells its story in layers. You see the fingerprints of empire, wars, revolutions, and innovations all merged into a vibrant urban tapestry. Quirky detail: in some corners of London, Roman walls remain visible, hidden beneath cafes or office lobbies, like ghosts of the past, casually peeking into the present. The city remains messy, loud, expensive, and unpredictable. A place where history collides with the modern, where every street is a palimpsest of human endeavor. You sense that London's true identity has never been in perfection or order. It is in survival and adaptation. London, in all its contradictions, continues to endure, defy, and inspire. A city that has learned to turn chaos into continuity. As you wander further into 21st century London, the city feels like a living, breathing organism. It is constantly reshaping itself, while carrying centuries of history in every street, bridge, and building. The skyline is a jumble of contrasts. The Shard's jagged glass peak rises alongside centuries-old church spires. The walkie-talkie building looms cheekily over the Thames, almost daring you to judge its aesthetics. You hear the hum of traffic, the clatter of bicycles, and the constant murmur of voices in every imaginable language. A reminder that London's magnetism for the world has never waned. Diversity is everywhere. Walk through Southall and smell the blend of curry spices mingling with the earthy aroma of fresh produce. Pop into Brixton and hear reggae rhythms spill into the streets from record stores and market stalls. Chinatown offers a feast for the senses, with lanterns and the mouth-watering scent of dim sum. In Hammersmith, Polish bakeries sit next to Turkish cafes, while Ethiopian restaurants occupy corners that once housed Victorian tailor. The city has become a living museum of migration, a mosaic of cultures layered over centuries of history. Quirky fact: in some South London neighborhoods, curry houses host Caribbean-themed nights, creating fusion menus. Historians still debate whether this blending enriches or dilutes traditional cultural identities, but the vibrancy is undeniable. Economically, London pulses as a global hub. Canary Wharf and the City of London Tower above the streets. The financial sector hums with energy, while creative industries and tech startups inject vitality into formerly neglected areas. Quirky detail: rooftop beekeeping initiatives on office towers symbolize a city trying to balance industry with environmental awareness. Historians still argue whether London's financial dominance truly benefits all residents or widens economic divides. Transportation infrastructure has kept pace with expansion. The London Underground continues to thread the city efficiently, while Crossrail links distant boroughs. Electric buses, cycle lanes, and pedestrian zones are increasingly common, shaping the rhythm of daily life. Yet, the city remains challenged by congestion and pollution, echoing concerns from Victorian London. Civic life is vibrant. Festivals and street fairs bring communities together. Historic landmarks like the Tower of London and St. Paul's Cathedral anchor the city's identity. Modern additions like the London Eye and Olympic venues further enrich the cityscape. Quirky tidbit: river ferries now host silent discos and yoga classes, blending traditional transit with contemporary entertainment. London still carries shadows of its past. Economic inequality persists, and housing remains expensive. The city continues to face security and public health challenges. Yet, in every corner, from Canary Wharf to hidden Roman walls, the city's resilience is palpable. London's identity is woven from its physical structures and the people who inhabit them. Walking along the Thames, you reflect on centuries of survival. From Roman marshes to the Great Fire and the Blitz, London has continuously adapted. Each era leaves its imprint: cobblestones, Georgian terraces, and glass skyscrapers. Quirky fact: some of the city's oldest pubs trace their lineage back to medieval taverns frequented by traders. Historians still debate whether London's chaotic layering hinders city planning or is what gives it character. As evening falls, you see the city lights twinkle along the river. Reflections of modern towers intermingle with centuries-old bridges and the faint outline of historic walls. London feels alive, yet timeless, chaotic, yet coherent. It is messy, crowded, expensive, endlessly fascinating, and stubbornly enduring. A city defined by its constant ability to attract people, ideas, and ambition. The city's story is ongoing, a palimpsest written by every generation that calls it home. Now, stepping fully into the 21st century, London feels almost dizzying in its scale and complexity. The streets pulse with activity. Double-decker buses rumble past cyclists weaving through bike lanes. Delivery vans navigate narrow alleys, and tourists wander between iconic landmarks. The air is a mix of diesel, street food, and the occasional floral perfume from a well-tended park. Everywhere you look, you see contrasts: centuries-old stone buildings pressed up against glass towers, Victorian facades shadowed by the Shard or the walkie-talkie, and cozy pubs next to sleek cocktail bars. London is messy, chaotic, and wonderfully alive. The population now exceeds 9 million, the most it has been since before World War II. You hear hundreds of languages, reflecting waves of immigration from the Caribbean, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Africa, Eastern Europe, and beyond. Neighborhoods are cultural mosaics: Brixton's Caribbean influence, South Asian vibrancy, Hackney's creative hubs, Chinatown's lantern-lit streets, and Turkish or Polish communities tucked into everyday corners. The city's food, music, and festivals are a sensory encyclopedia of the world, often colliding in unexpected ways: a Polish bakery selling jerk chicken pastries, or a South Asian restaurant hosting reggae nights. Quirky detail: the city hosts an annual urban beach along the Thames, complete with sand, deck chairs, and DJ sets, a playful nod to Londoners' desire to bend nature and tradition to their will. Historians still debate whether modern cultural fusion erodes heritage or creates a richer, layered identity. London's skyline continues to evolve. The Shard, Gherkin, and walkie-talkie are joined by newer additions like the cheesegrater and the scalpel, all jostling for visual dominance alongside historic churches and palaces. Tower Bridge gleams at night, the Thames reflecting its lights, and St. Paul's Cathedral remains stoic, a silent witness to 2 millennia of transformation. Beneath your feet, the underground snakes unseen, carrying millions daily, while Crossrail connects distant neighborhoods, like veins distributing lifeblood to the metropolis. Quirky fact: some of the city's office towers host rooftop bees, and a few even maintain small rooftop gardens to attract wildlife, a nod to ecology in an urban jungle. Historians still argue whether such modern environmental measures are significant or merely symbolic gestures in a city that has always dominated nature rather than lived in harmony with it. Economic power flows like the Thames itself. Canary Wharf and the City of London remain global finance centers, attracting talent, investment, and energy from across the planet. Yet inequality persists. In some areas, ultramodern flats tower over historic neighborhoods where housing remains a perennial struggle. London has learned through centuries of fires, plagues, wars, and industrial upheaval, that survival requires adaptation, and its citizens continue to innovate, protest, and find solutions. Quirky tidbit: some pubs maintain registers tracing back centuries, offering patrons a literal sip of history with their ale. The cultural pulse of London is undeniable. Music, art, theater, and literature thrive alongside cutting-edge technology and startups. The city hosts global events, attracts tourists in the millions, and balances the old with the new. From Shakespeare's Globe to the Tate Modern, from the Royal Opera House to street murals in Shoreditch, every corner tells a story. London remains the city of contrasts, a place where ancient foundations support cutting-edge glass towers, where centuries of upheaval coexist with modern vibrancy. Through it all, London remains a city defined by survival, adaptation, and resilience. Every era, Roman, Saxon, Viking, Norman, medieval, Renaissance, Victorian, wartime, and contemporary, has left its imprint. Cobblestones, stone walls, timber frames, brick terraces, glass towers, and multicultural streets all weave together to tell a story of endurance. You realize that London's identity isn't just in its buildings or geography. It lives in the people who inhabit it, the culture they create, and the history they carry forward. From marshland to global metropolis, London has always pulled people toward opportunity, creativity, and ambition. Each disaster, each conquest, each boom, and each cultural wave added layers to a city that refuses to stand still. The city is messy, crowded, and sometimes exhausting, but it is also endlessly fascinating, endlessly resilient, and profoundly alive. As you walk along the Thames at sunset, the lights reflecting off the water, the echoes of centuries past whisper in your ear. London is never finished, it is never static, and it will never stop changing, inviting you to experience its chaos, beauty, and enduring spirit. The city slows as night falls. The clatter of traffic softens to a distant hum, and the chatter of pedestrians becomes a gentle murmur. Streetlights cast warm golden pools across wet cobblestones, and the Thames shimmers like liquid history, reflecting centuries of change in its rippling surface. You breathe in, letting the smells of the city, faint smoke, blooming flowers in hidden parks, the occasional scent of fried street food mingle and settle. London, in this quiet moment, feels less like a bustling metropolis and more like a living memory, carrying every era it has ever known. You remember the Roman bridge, the Viking raids, the medieval guilds, the Great Fire, the Blitz, each disaster, each triumph, layered atop one another, leaving traces you can feel in the air. The city hums with stories that never truly end, even as the modern skyline glints in the fading light. The ghosts of past centuries linger in alleys, beneath taverns, and behind church walls. You sense their presence, not as something frightening, but as a gentle reminder of continuity, of human resilience and creativity. In the distance, the lights of Westminster sparkle softly. St. Paul's dome catches the last blush of sunset, and the bridges stretch like golden threads across the river. Everything seems to slow, and you can almost hear the centuries whispering together, urging patience, curiosity, and reflection. The chaos of the day, the noise, the energy, the bustle, fades into a calm, steady rhythm, the heartbeat of a city that refuses to stop, refuses to be tamed, refuses to forget. As you close your eyes, let the weight of history settle around you like a warm blanket. The streets, the towers, the markets, the pubs, the people, all of it breathing together, all of it part of a story still unfolding. London endures, London adapts, London dreams, and so can you.